My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. If I have to describe myself, I am a blonde, tall, blue-eyed and self-conscious woman. As they say, looks are not everything. I guess my story is an example of that. When I walk down the street, people's eyes are usually on me. My friends always say, "You have everything, Claire, your marriage is perfect, you are perfect." But they don't know how empty I am inside. I have been married to my husband Matt for 8 years. Matt is a successful man. He's a senior executive in an advertising agency. He's always busy with his work. He leaves home early in the morning and comes back late in the evening, exhausted. He usually sits on the couch, we have a few words and then he's on his phone. He hasn't touched the bed for 2 years. At first this didn't affect me so much. I thought, he focuses on his work, everything is for us. But now I feel like I'm living at home with a stranger. Our house is just like in an American movie. An organized life with a garden on a clean street. But what I feel inside this order is nothing but chaos. I get up in the morning, I make breakfast, I tidy the house one day after another. I make an effort for Matt, I try to make him happy but in vain. I have no idea what I'm doing for my own happiness. Sometimes I feel so lonely. You know how you want to feel loved, noticed, valued? It's been a long time since I felt that. I go out with friends, I go to yoga classes, but to what end? There is an emptiness inside me and nothing fills it. Then Matt said to me one day, "Dad is struggling a bit now. There's no one to take care of the house. And you can spend time with him. It'll do you good." George, Matt's father. He's 70, an old architect. He used to be quite famous, but now he's an old, lonely man. At first I thought, oh, who's going to bother with an old man? But then I thought maybe it'll do me some good. There's no harm in trying something new, right? The first time I went to George's house, I was a bit timid and awkward. George at first glance seems quiet, cold. But his posture, his air. He's something else. He's taken care of himself despite his age. There's a wisdom, a lived experience in his eyes. Those looks. It's like he's scanning you from head to toe. I was nervous at first, but then the more time I spent with him, the more I realized that he was actually a very different person. George and I started chatting. At first it was simple stuff, the weather, Matt's childhood, funny memories. But then our conversations got deeper. We talked about life, about human relationships. He would say things that made so much sense, sometimes he would hit me with a sentence that I would think about it all night long. One day George made me feel like he was really listening to me. It's hard to explain. You know how people listen to you but don't really understand. George understood me. He recognized the emptiness inside me. I hadn't had this feeling for so long that I didn't know what to do. At first I went just to help. I tidied George's house, I cooked, we watched TV together. But over time these little routines began to give me a strange kind of peace. The time I spent with George turned into the most colorful moments of my life. And that feeling, those looks. The moment I realized how George looked at me, something changed inside me. There was a warmth, a meaning in that look. And I felt safe with him, safe and alive. I was actually angry with myself for feeling this way. I knew it was wrong, but at the same time I had never experienced anything else that felt so right. Translated with dpel.com free version. That day George and I were home alone. Matt was at work and I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. George was flipping through his books as usual, but after a while he came into the kitchen. He quietly approached me and picked up the coffee cup from the counter. "Would you like me to freshen your coffee?" he asked. I was always impressed by his little thoughtful demeanor. "Sure, why not?" I said with a slight smile. Nothing different from the usual, but George's presence was so intense that the simplicity of the moment took my breath away. As I turned towards the stove, I realized the distance between us, how close we were. My hands began to shake involuntarily. George filled his coffee cup and came back to me. Our hands touched as we exchanged cups. At that moment, it was as if the whole house fell silent for a moment. "Is everything all right, Claire?" he asked. His voice was soft and worried. I looked into his eyes, then quickly looked away. What could I say? Everything was not okay. My heart, mind and body were going in different directions. I continued chopping the vegetables, but I could feel George standing next to me watching me. After a few seconds he gently placed his hand on mine. The knife stopped. So did time. "Claire," he said. His name came out of his lips in such a different way that it was impossible to describe the feeling it gave me. I looked back at him. He must have seen something in my eyes because he didn't take his hand away. "George, we mustn't," I said. but there was no determination in my voice. It was more like a plea, perhaps asking him to talk me out of it. I know, he said. But he knew, and yet he wouldn't back down. His contradiction was pulling me deeper and deeper. Suddenly he came up to my shoulder and leaned on my cheek. I felt his breath, my heart beating wildly. "Why are you here, Claire? Are you really happy?" he whispered. This question shot through me like an arrow. Was I really happy? No, I wasn't. But how did he realize that? I didn't answer, I couldn't, and George didn't wait. He touched his fingers to my cheek and turned me slightly toward him. "You deserve to be yourself, if only for a moment," he said. At that moment all the barriers inside me broke down. I didn't try to resist. When our lips met, everything was so natural, so inevitable. A warmth filled me that I hadn't felt in years. When I felt his hands on my waist, I realized that even my skin was hungry for him. His touch was so gentle yet so uncontrolled. In that moment it was just me and George. He gently leaned me against the counter. Our eyes met for a moment. As his lips slid down my neck, I felt both peace and guilt. I felt so incomplete, so alone, that this moment felt more real than anything else. "Say something," George said in a whisper. But I didn't have the strength to speak. I just closed my eyes and sank into the moment. I don't know if it was minutes or hours, but at some point reality caught up with me. I put my hands on his chest and pushed gently. "Stop," I said, "this isn't right." But George looked into my eyes and nodded. "I know," he said. "But the feelings are right, Claire. And you know it." Silence fell. In the middle of the kitchen I was caught between right and wrong, between myself and my life. I let go of George's hand and took a step back, but the storm inside me would never subside. Translated with deepl.com free version. That night I couldn't sleep until morning, tossing and turning in bed, replaying the same scenes over and over in my head. George's touch, his whispers, the determination in his eyes. Everything was so clear that when I closed my eyes I saw it even more vividly. But no matter how much I romanticized the moment, deep down inside I knew it was wrong. Matt went to work early in the morning. I tried not to look at his face as I made him breakfast, feeling as if everything was written all over my face. Matt acted as if he didn't notice anything. He was as polite as ever, as loving as ever. His goodwill made me feel even more guilty. But the worst thing was being in the same house with George. Ignoring what had happened, pretending it was a normal morning, having breakfast in silence. All this was suffocating me. I avoided looking at George, but every now and then when our eyes met, it was a reminder of everything. For a few days I tried not to be alone with George, but somehow he found a way to corner me. In the garden, in the kitchen, even in the car on the way back from the market. He would always somehow approach me and start a conversation with a simple question. One morning, George caught me on the porch while Matt was at work. I set my coffee cup down on the table and started to get up, but he gently grabbed my arm. "Claire, we need to talk," he said. "George, please. What can we talk about?" I said, my voice cracking a little. I was trying not to look at him, but his eyes were on me. "You're ignoring me," he said. "But we both know what happened. It wasn't a mistake." "George, what are you trying to do?" "I'm married." "It's a mistake," I protested, but he shook his head from side to side. "No, Claire. You can't fool yourself by saying that. That moment was real. What you felt, what I felt. It's not a lie." I ran my hands through my hair and took a deep breath. "George, this isn't true. Matt is my husband. He's my life." "What about your life?" he asked. "What about your feelings, Claire? How many years have you been a prisoner in this house? Matt may be a good man, but does he really see you? Does he really listen to you?" George's words hurt me because there was some truth in every word. But I couldn't accept it. I said, "George, it doesn't make sense. We can't do this," I said, but the hesitation in my voice seemed to give him courage. He took a step closer. "Claire, you're not happy. You've forgotten yourself. I can see you, the real you, the woman inside you. And that woman deserves more." These words turned me upside down. I realized how long I had forgotten that woman inside me, myself, but at the same time I was overwhelmed by the guilt of this truth. "George, please," I whispered, but at that moment I didn't even know what I was saying. George put his hand on my cheek and looked into my eyes. "I don't want you to be with me, Claire. I just want you to be yourself. You deserve to be yourself." Those words shattered every wall of resistance inside me. But they also scared me. George was right, but what was right? I looked at him and took a step back. "George, I don't know where this is going, but Matt is my life. I can't hurt him, I said. There was both certainty and deep indecision in my voice. George lowered his head and took a deep breath. Hey Claire. But this story won't end here. You know that, and then he walked away from the porch. I know there must be an end to this story. But what's the right thing? Protect my family or find myself? I'm lost in this dilemma. If it were you, which would you choose? What's right or what's in your heart?